got ready for bed, and then he came to you so you had some
What's up, man?
How you doing? Oh, yeah, you filming? Oh.
Hold on for a second. Woo!
Watch it, Angelo.
You winning?
Yeah.
How much you winning?
I don't know how much it is now, but I got at least 1,000 on this play. And I got 493 coming up. Yeah, David just left here.
He did?
Yeah. Well, I said, you guys got things all ready for tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Things worked out. You talk to your mother before you
Oh
left?
yeah, we got plans already.
Oh, okay.
We're going to lunch buffet.
Oh, now?
No, we're going to lunch buffet at about 1:32. So meet back up at the room.
1:32?
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
it's 12 o'clock now.
so about 1:30 we're going to lunch. So I'm going to talk to Dee. When I'm finished with Dee, I'm going to come back up.
Oh, that's right. You never had a conversation with her.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Your mother works.
ran out of money. That's something. All right. I'm going to talk to your mother right now.
To your room?
You're right.
Okay.
I'll talk to you later. Oh, but as long as I got you here. Betty.
Yeah.
You know, we talked and had a good time. So tell me more about your sisters and your brothers. Tell me about my daddy.
About your daddy.
Mhm.
Well, your daddy and I, your daddy was always my favorite when we were growing up. We got along really, really well. And he was always such a fun-loving person. And so was I. All of us loved to have fun. That's all we did was get together and have fun. But we remember some really special things about Rudy.
All right, tell him.
That were especially funny. One was when we decided to tie him up one night. We were all playing together. We decided to tie him up, and we tied his hands to his feet up to in the back to his hands, and threw him in the bed. And we heard Mother was coming in, and everybody had to pretend like they were asleep. We forgot about Rudy.
Oh no.
We forgot about Rudy being tied up, and he ended up being tied up all night.
And what did he do in the morning?
I don't remember how that situation ended up. Dolores, do you remember how it ended up? I don't know how it ended up.
You
I guess
tied up
Mother
all
found out that his hands were sore and his feet were sore, and we were sorry. But we never forgot it. He never forgot it either, and I think you should ask him about that.
I will.
How that story ended up. Oh boy, well, Rudy used to always come and see my shows when I was dancing, and we used to hang out a lot and laugh a lot. Your daddy is still the same way he was as a kid. And you know that's what's special, is keeping that child spirit in you throughout your life. That's the way to have fun, just like a child, carefree and enjoy. And he passed that on to his children, because all of you have the same spirit. You love to have fun and you love to just enjoy life. So our family is just full of that same spirit, and that showed last night before last, when we had our first gathering. Everybody was so happy to be together, you could see that those that usually quiet weren't very quiet. I think you'll agree that it brought out the best in everybody. It brought out that free, carefree spirit, and it took all of us being together to bring that out. Just being happy to be in each other's company and being so comfortable with each other, that showed, because folks got up and danced that we have never seen dance in our life, like Roy. Roy, when we saw Roy loosen up over there in the corner, start patting his feet and got on the floor and danced, that was special. I think, Dolores, you'll agree that you've never seen Roy dance before, have you? Well, that was special. That meant to me that everybody's spirit was so high and so happy that it brought out that real good, that real childlike freedom to express yourself.
Excellent. Thank you, Betty.
This is looking good.
Okay.
I'll wait till she finishes off the phone.
Oh, so while we're waiting, how's the trip?
This trip, oh, it's fabulous. It's restful. And it's also very exciting. You know, I love the lights and the action going on. This is a place like no other place.
That's for sure.
We looked at the geography of the place. We're in a big bowl, you know, the way it's shaped.
I didn't have noticed that.
Oh, just take a look out your window and see how things are.
Sort of a fold on the mountains.
Ed said he thinks a crater might have been here at one time.
Okay. Little of an asteroid.
They started this, he said he remembers the year that they started building Vegas, and he's 76 years old. He's wondering where it's going to be 76 years from now. And if at one time in the future, are we going to see a ghost town and have people say what it used to be like? Is this your first time here?
Oh, second time.
Oh, second time. That's right. You came that time we all met up. That was when Hair Wars wasn't in existence, but David was going to have a party come.
Right.
And he canceled. And I called your father and said, we're not going, we're canceling. And everybody said, you better be there, because we all made plans, took off from work and everything. You better be there. So I came on in anyway by myself and put one quarter in and won $400.
Fantastic.
Yeah, beginner's luck.
Okay, first start off with, because people might see this who don't know our family, so just tell who you are.
Well, I'm Dolores Camo, and it's D-O-L-O-R-E-S. Most people forget the D-O. They want to call me D-E. I am the fourth born of the Camo family of 7. So that puts me in the middle. There were 3 older and 3 younger. And I used to have a little song I hear on the radio, Don't Mess with Mr. In Between. That was my theme song. But I found out today that you didn't know that I was a writer. I started writing when I was 9 years old, in the 4th grade. I wrote my first story, but it was a story that you called my father Boutte, right? It was the first story he told me. It was about a one-eyed fish, a flounder. And when I wrote it up, the teacher didn't believe that I wrote it. She sent for my brother Roy and asked him who did her homework for her. It was so advanced for a 9-year-old. Roy said nobody does her homework for her. What she didn't know is I was doing other folks' homework for them. But that was the first story I wrote, and I found out that I could tell a story as well as it was told to me. And that was one good thing I learned from my father, is how to tell a story, how to captivate an audience in telling it. And after that, I found that I was good at poetry. So I started writing poetry, and when I became around 16, I was doing personalized poetry for friends. And I won contests with a couple of my poems that I wrote when I was 16, that I won the contest after I was married. So they were still good. I'm doing a book on these things now. Now, you're interested in what my hobbies and interests were when I was young. 9 was a good year for a lot of beginnings. Besides the writing, I started swimming, and I taught myself to swim from a library book, and I was forced to learn because my 2 brothers almost drowned me playing with me, and I couldn't tread, and I didn't know how to breathe.
One second. So you're telling about you.
We were
9 was a
swimming.
good year.
Yeah, that was a good year for new beginnings. And one time, your dad and I went swimming at Washington Park Pool, and we were with neighbor friends.
Oh, 1 second. Start over. People watching this, it won't be my dad. So use names.
Okay.
Not associations.
All right.
All right. So, yeah, 9 and talk
All right.
swimming.
I was still around that age when Rudy and I went swimming, and we were there with neighbor friends. One guy we called Dub, and some other friends from the neighborhood. And Dub had drifted into the 6-foot area of the pool. None of us could tread water, but we were all kind of paddling around. And Dub was hollering for help. He couldn't touch bottom. And you would not believe this, but Rudy went underwater, stood on the bottom of the pool, and held Dub up to get the air while we were all yelling for help. And the lifeguard thought that they were horsing around and just playing. And I had to jump out of the water and go tell him they're drowning. And he did that for quite a few times. When he came up for air, he had to go back down and hold the boy up. And he saved his life because he would not have survived that. And this was, now you know, if I was 9, he was 10. Rudolph was just a year older than me. And we went to Washington Park reunion with the Woodlawn group of people. And I was there in 1987. First time I ever met up with them. They'd been meeting for years in the park every year, trying to keep Woodlawn together. And some young man walked up to me and grabbed me in a bear hug, and the first thing he said, "Your brother saved my life." So he never forgot it, like we never forgot it. But he was forever thankful. He became a postal inspector. So, and he looked good for his age and his work, and he's tall and handsome. Shortly after that incident, they moved away from the neighborhood, so we never saw them during all that time. So that was a good reunion. I also started swimming seriously, and I became a competitive swimmer with the Washington Park coach. And I did laps with people in Reese Park. They had big contests there, but they weren't very fair. And I was 12 by the time I had the big race, but I swam against 15-year-olds, and it wasn't a fair race. But I came in third. They only gave trophies to first and second. And when I found out how unfair they really were, there was another woman there, coach from State Park. Her name was Gouchenier was the last name. She was supposed to do certain dives, and they described dives that they felt she couldn't handle. And she did them. She ended up getting a trophy. So you have to go beyond where you are. You have to get better than the average. You have to really work when you want to succeed in something like that in a sport. event that's not fair. When Eric was lifting weights, my son Eric wanted to be a champion weightlifter. I reminded him of that incident. And I said, don't look for fairness. You'll have to find a way to get around it. And he did. And he ended up being a weightlifting champion. He was a national teenage champion in his class. He became city, state, national, and then because he won and they didn't expect him to win, they canceled the international competition. So that was it. They didn't have another competition. But he still won, and it's still in the records. And we have that in our genealogical display, his successes in that. We try to keep a list of all the athletes in the family, and weightlifting was his choice. We have others, football players and basketball players, and anybody who has done anything along that line should notify the family, send pictures and information about themselves. I think I'm going to start collecting biographies and photos. And now,
so let's sort of jump ahead. Since you're sort of talking about collecting biographies and photos, tell me about how you got started researching the family history, because you've been sort of the de facto historian. We all depend on, whenever there's a question like, well, go ask Dee, she knows.
well, I'll tell you how I knew, and how I knew from childhood who was who, and I am still the one who knows. I have gotten a call from every child in our family who's doing a project for school, and I'm told they all got A's in their results. But my interest started when I was about 8, so this was something before the 9-year-old. I asked my mother one day, don't we have any family? We were living in Chicago. There was no family there. Our grandparents, we knew we had grandparents. We'd been south to Glencoe, Louisiana, to the country. And we knew them, but we didn't ever meet any cousins. My friends had cousins, aunts. They had extended families living with them. We had no one but ourselves. There were 7 of us. We should have been happy with ourselves, but you know, we wanted relatives. I wanted relatives. I was always a family-oriented kind of person. So my mother said, yes, we have plenty of family, and she got boxes of pictures out. And I offered to help her put them in the books. And as I was, and I did it horribly, now that I know how to handle archival material. You know, I glued things down and there was writing on the back. And right now I'm curious about the writing and I don't know how to get the glue off. But I pasted all these pictures down, but in doing so, I asked her who these people were. And she identified them, and she was very good about putting dates on the pictures. So that was very helpful. And I remember one time assuming one picture was her, and it was not her, it was one of her sisters. And they looked that much alike where I couldn't tell. If I had those pictures today to try to identify myself, I would fail, I would be wrong. But every question I asked my mother about, she gave me answers. She would tell me stories about them. I assumed my father didn't know his family. He said, oh, he didn't want to talk about them. He had such a horrible childhood, he said, that nobody liked him. He just didn't feel like he was treated well. His mother died when he was 12. And he had to go live with his grandparents, the maternal grandparents. And they never liked him. And most of it was because he thought of his coloring. It was more of the grandmother. She was half German. And she spoke a French dialect from, as he described it, from over the Rhine. The Germans over there spoke a French dialect. And when he came to live there, she would not give him anything he asked for until he learned to ask for it in her dialect. So he was forced to learn her language. And I'll tell you in a little while how that came to be very necessary at one time in his life.
When he was in the Army, as a translator?
That's right.
He told me that story.
He wasn't in the Army. He was working as a civil servant. And,
Go ahead, tell me that now.
I'll tell it to you now. He was working as a civil servant as a plaster and decorator. They had him down as something else that paid less money, but that's not what he agreed to do. So he wrote to the commissioner and complained. And they came to do an investigation, and when they came, he knew when they were coming. They wanted him in on the meeting, but the officials told him, "You don't have to come up here. We don't need you right now." And he thought about that, and he said, "No, I'm going up there." And he came in on their meeting, and they were trying to cover it up and everything, but he got the right position and the right title and the right money. But when he got that job, they decided to give him a group of German soldiers to supervise. They did it for two reasons. They knew how Germans felt about blacks, which was not good. And they knew how he would be persecuted or, you know, made to feel inferior. They wouldn't work for him. So it was a twofold thing. But one day, one of the Polish guards had hit a German soldier in the head with the butt of his rifle. And he was left on the ground to bleed. He would have bled to death. My father came along and found him and picked him up and took him to the infirmary. And they saved him by taking care of him. A day or so later, one of the German officers came to him and said, "We heard what you did for one of our guys. And we thank you for that. And we're going to work for you, and we're going to make you look good. We'll do anything you want." He had them washing walls, and they did it with gusto. They were the best work team, and of course nobody could understand
So
it.
where was this exactly?
This was
What year about?
Oh, in the 40s. The Germans, the prisoners were held, I believe it was Skokie. And, you know, he was a quartermaster on Persian Road.
So we had German prisoners in the United States?
We really did.
That's
and-
something that has eluded me.
And I'm trying to get Freedom of Information to give me, I'm trying to get that report now. Here's about the language.
Okay.
There was an incident where they had a court case, and the Germans were speaking that same dialect that he had to learn. And they couldn't understand them, and they read in his biography, in his application, that he spoke French. So they called him in and asked could he understand them, and he could. So he...
One moment. I'm going to pause for a second.
Okay.
All right.
So when they looked at Roy Comeau's application, they noticed that he spoke French. And they called Roy in and asked him would he be an interpreter for this court case. And he was, and he was able to help them on that. So that was a plus. But there was another story he told me when he learned that I was doing research on Dorie Miller. My father told me about Dorie Miller and how his name came up in that office. The general had a daughter that one of the officers was dating. This general did not want his daughter dating this officer. So he assigned him to someplace else, and he was going on a ship. The officer told another officer of a lower title you better jockey for position because he's not coming back. And Roy said that that officer was on the same ship as Dory Miller when they went down. So he said he felt there was a conspiracy there. Who knows?
Okay, one moment. Okay, so let's resume.
Okay. I don't know if you realize it, but I've written a biography about my father, and I'm still putting it together. When I got ready to do the title, I decided to call it Big Train. That was one of the names he was called. Now, I wonder if the grandchildren know why he was called Boutte by some. The earlier grandchildren called him Boutte. The later grandchildren called him Babu. And here I'm calling him Big Train. Now why? I'll tell you why. Frances was Effidel's daughter, her only child, the first grandchild. And when she spent time talking to Roy, my father, he would talk French to her. And she thought she was talking French to him, and it ended up to be Boutte, Boutte, Boutte. And whenever she came near him, she would say Boutte. That became his name. Eric calls him that, Mark calls him that. All of my children call him Boutte. Aline, the older grandchildren, Aline and Brian and Francis. Now, I'm not sure. I think the cutoff came along with Hafisa.